Sorry for the shakiness. There we go. Now I have to go over here to the YouTubes, to the Facebook, because I promised people over there that I would send them over here to you at the Gentleman Psychic. So here we go. I'm going to come over here for a moment, and then I will go over here, FaceTime. I don't know, go live. Okay, it says add a title. I don't know what it is. I don't understand. Oh, here we go, title. Murder. We'll just stop there, that's what. Hello. Oh yeah, the movie is great. I love the book too. The book is longer than I thought. Okay, so here we are. I am live on YouTube. I am live on the Book of Faces. The thing is, I'm going to have everyone on my Facebook page to go over to my YouTube. That's what I'm going to do, because I want everyone to go over to the YouTube, because I am on YouTube. It lasts forever, and well, at least it lasts longer, and it's easier to find. So if you are watching on my Facebook page, please go to thegentlemanpsychic.com, or go to the Gentleman Psychic on YouTube rather. Find me here. Switch over so you can come and see more exciting adventures of the Murder on the Orient Express. It's not the murder, it's just Murder on the Orient Express. I do have a couple of, see this light here on this Facebook thing. So the thing is, my darlings, I have a couple of things coming up. I'm going to be doing a tutorial for YouTube where I will be painting an old chair to look like leather. Now, everyone was curious as to how my method, my technique, so I'll be working on that this coming week, maybe this week. My furniture is just now arriving. Good to see you, Michelle. Lovely to see you. So again, I cannot comment on YouTube, love. I don't know why, Beck, you can't. I don't know why you can't, but you have to go over to YouTube, because my Facebook feed is going to be ending shortly. Beck, I don't know why you can't comment on my YouTube tutorials. I don't know why. You should be able to. I have people commenting on my YouTube now. I don't know why. I am barely functioning in the 21st century. I don't know. That's all I can say. I don't know. So if you are watching over there, though, please go over. If you're watching here on Facebook, please go over here to my YouTube. I'm going to talk directly to my YouTube people. Go over to the Gentleman Psychic on YouTube. Anyway, on Facebook, I will. Yes, I can see you there, Glenette. I can see you on there. I can see you. So comment on. Go on to YouTube and comment over there. All right, I'm going to end the live for the Facebook, and now I'll be over here. The lighting looks good at this time. Thank you so much, Mary Jane. I appreciate that. I do understand. I'm with you. I will try to figure it out. Okay, perfect. I'm going to end here so everyone can go over to my YouTube and watch. That's what I have to do. All right. Love you over there. Love you over here. Hi, Dee. You are on YouTube. Lovely to see you. I'm going to end it here, and I will talk directly to my YouTube people. Hi, darlings. So lovely to see you. I put this table up here so I could figure it out. Kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I have it. It's a great thing. I'm learning to use it. Hello, Luna. Lovely to see you. So I got it so that I could do more editing, and so that I could do my Skype calls, and I could do, hi, Kendallin, good to see you. But I've been using a smartphone for a little while, so it's different on a computer. Anyway, one more thought. So the chair that I'm going to be painting, I'm running into a dilemma. You can leave comments down below in the section. So the chair that I procured is an antique. It's, oh goodness, probably 1870s, 1880s, Eastlake, I believe. And it's in really bad shape, but it has great bones. Now, my initial thought was to paint it to look like red leather. But upon closer inspection, it looks like at one point it used to be, yes, Beck, I can see you. So it used to be green, I can tell by the fabric that's on it. So you can suggest, what should I do, red or green on that antique chair? You can leave your comments in the section down below, wherever it is. If it's green, it's going to go in here. If it's red, it'll go in there. I don't know. Anyway, I guess I should start with the murder on the Orient Express. So here we go. And again, forgive me if I'm not able to comment and see your lovely comments as I'm reading. That was a strange experiment to try to do them both. All right, darlings, here we go. Murder on the Orient Express. Thank you, Kentlin. I appreciate it. 8. Further surprising revelations. Nothing would surprise me now, said Monsieur Bouc. Nothing. Even if everybody in the train proved to have been in the Armstrong household, I should not express surprise. That is very profound remark, said Perrault. Would you like to see what your favorite suspect, the Italian, has to say for himself? You're going to make another one of those famous guesses of yours. Precisely. It is really the most extraordinary case, said Constantine. No, it is most natural. Monsieur Bouc flung up his arms in comic despair. If this is what you call natural, mon ami. Words failed him. Perrault had by this time requested the dining car attendant to fetch Antonio Foscarelli. The big Italian had a wary look in his eyes as he came in. He shot nervous glances from side to side like a trapped animal. What do you want, he said. I've nothing to tell you. Nothing. Do you hear? Per Dio. He struck his hand on the table. Yes, you have something more to tell us, said Perrault firmly. The truth. The truth? He shot an uneasy glance at Perrault. All the assurance and geniality had gone out of his manner. Moi aussi. It may be that I know it already, but it will be a point in your favor if it comes from you spontaneously. It will be a point in your favor if it comes from you spontaneously. You talk like the American police. Come clean. That is what they say. Come clean. Ah, so you have had experience with the New York police? No, never. They could not approve a thing against me, but it was not for want of trying. Perrault said quietly. That was in the American Armstrong case, was it not? You were the chauffeur. His eyes met with those of the Italian. The bluster went out of the big man. He was like a pricked balloon. Since you know, why are you asking me? Why did you lie this morning? Business reasons. Besides, I do not trust Yugoslav police. They ate the Italians. They would not have given me a justice. Perhaps it is exactly justice that they would have given you. No, I had nothing to do with this business last night. I never left my carriage. The long-faced Englishman, he can tell you. It was not I who killed this pig, this Ratchet. You cannot approve anything against me. Perrault was writing something on a sheet of paper. He looked up and said quietly, "Very good, you can go." Foscarelli lingered uneasily. "You realize that it was not I, that I could have had nothing to do with it. I said you could go. It is a conspiracy. You are going to frame me, all for a pig of a man who should have gone to the chair. It was an infamy that he did not. If it had been me, if I had been arrested. But it was not you. You had nothing to do with it, with the kidnapping of the child." "What is that you are saying? Why, that little one, she was the delight of the house. Tonio, she called me, and she would sit in the car and pretend to hold the wheel. All the household worshipped her. Even the police came to understand that. Ah, the beautiful little one." His voice had softened. The tears came into his eyes. Then he wheeled round abruptly on his heel and strode out of the dining car. "Pietro," called Perrault. The dining car attendant came at a run. "The number 10, the Swedish lady." "Bien, monsieur." "Another," cried Monsieur Bouc. "No, it is not possible. I tell you, it is not possible." "Mon cher, we have to know. Even if, in the end, everybody on the train proves to have motive for killing Ratchet, we have to know. Once we know, we can settle once for all where the guilt lies." "Ugh, my head is spinning," groaned Monsieur Bouc. Greta Olson was ushered in sympathetically by the attendant. She was weeping bitterly. She collapsed on the seat facing Perrault and wept steadily into her large handkerchief. "Now, do not distress yourself, mademoiselle. Do not distress yourself." Perrault patted her on the shoulder. "Just a few little words of truth, that is all. You were the nurse who was in charge of little Daisy Armstrong?" It's true," wept the wretched woman. "Ah, she was an angel, a little sweet, trustful angel. She knew nothing but kindness and love, and she was taken away by that wicked man, cruelly treated. Her poor mother, the poor other little one who never lived at all. You cannot understand, you cannot know. If you had been there as I was, if you had seen the whole terrible tragedy, I ought to have told the truth about myself this morning, but I was afraid. I did not so rejoice that the evil man was dead, that he could not any more kill or torture little children. I cannot speak. I have no words." She wept with more vehemence than ever. Perrault continued to pat her gently on the shoulder. There. I comprehend everything. Everything, I tell you. I will ask you no more questions. It is enough that you have admitted that I know to be the truth. I understand, I tell you." By now, inarticulate with sobs, Greta Olson rose and groped her way blindly towards the door. As she reached, she collided with the man coming in. It was the valet, Masterman. He came straight up to Perrault and spoke in his usual quiet, unemotional voice. "I hope I'm not intruding, sir. I thought it best to come along at once, sir, and tell you the truth. I was Colonel Armstrong's batman in the war, sir, and afterwards I was his valet in New York. I'm afraid I concealed that fact this morning. It was very wrong of me, sir, and I thought I'd better come and make a clean breast of it. But I hope, sir, that you are not suspecting Tonio in any way. Old Tonio, sir, wouldn't hurt a fly, and I can swear positively that he never left the carriage at all last night. So you see, sir, he couldn't have done it. Tonio may be a foreigner, sir, but he's a very gentle creature, not like those nasty murdering Italians one reads about. He stopped. Poirot looked steadily at him. Is that all you have to say? That is all, sir. He paused. Then, as Poirot did not speak, he made an apologetic little bow, and after a momentary hesitation, left the dining car in the same quiet, unobtrusive fashion as he had come. This, said Dr. Constantine, is more wildly improbable than any Roman policier that I have ever read. I agree, said Monsieur Bouc. Of the 12 passengers in that coach, 9 have been proved to have had a connection with the Armstrong case. What next, I ask you, or should I say, who next? I can almost give you the answer to your question, said Poirot. Here comes our American sleuth, Monsieur Hardman. Is he too coming to confess? Before Poirot could reply, the American had reached their table. He cocked an alert eye at them, and sitting down, he drawled out, "Just exactly what's up on this train? It seems bughouse to me." Poirot twinkled at him. "Are you quite sure, Monsieur Hardman, that you yourself were not the gardener at the Armstrong home?" "They didn't have a garden," replied Mr. Hardman literally. "Or the butler?" "Haven't got a fancy manner for a place like that. No, I never had any connection with the Armstrong house, but I'm beginning to believe I'm about the only one on this train who hadn't. Can you beat it? That's what I say. Can you beat it?" "It certainly is a little surprising," said Poirot mildly. "Sestrialgo," burst from Monsieur Bouc. Have you any ideas of your own about the crime, Monsieur Hardman?" inquired Poirot. "No, sir. It's got me beat. I don't know how to figure it out. They can't all be in it, but which one is the guilty party is beyond me. How did you get wise to all this? That's what I want to know." "I just guessed." "Then believe me, you're a pretty slick guesser. Yes, I'll tell the world you're a slick guesser." Mr. Hardman leaned back and looked at Poirot admiringly. "You'll excuse me," he said, "but no one would believe it to look at you. I take off my hat to you. I do indeed." "You are too kind, Monsieur Hardman." "Not at all. I've got to hand it to you." "All the same," said Poirot, "the problem is not yet quite solved. Can we say with authority that we know who killed Monsieur Ratchet?" "Count me out," said Mr. Hardman. "I'm not saying anything at all. I'm just full of natural admiration. What about the other two you've not had a guess at?" "The old American dame and that lady's maid. I suppose we can take that it's their only innocent parties on the train?" "Unless," said Poirot, smiling, "we can fit them into our little collection as, shall we say, housekeeper and cook in the Armstrong household." "Well, nothing in the world would surprise me now," said Mr. Hardman, with quiet resignation. "Bughouse. That's what this business is. Bughouse." "Ah, mon cher, that would be indeed stretching coincidence a little too far," said Monsieur Bouc. "They cannot all be in it." Poirot looked at him. "You do not understand," he said. "You do not understand at all. Tell me," he said, "do you know who killed Ratchet?" "Do you?" countered Monsieur Bouc. Poirot nodded. "Oh, yes," he said. "I have known for some time. It is clear that I wonder you have not seen it also." He looked at Hardman and asked, "And you?" The detective shook his head. He stared at Poirot curiously. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know at all. Which of them was it?" Poirot was silent for a minute. Then he said, "If you'll be so good, Monsieur Hardman, assemble everyone here. There are 2 possible solutions of the case. I want to lay them both before you all." Chapter 9. Poirot propounds 2 solutions. The passengers came crowding into the restaurant car and took their seats round the tables. They all bore more or less the same expression, one of expectancy mingled with apprehension. The Swedish lady was still weeping, and Mrs. Hubbard was comforting her. "Now, you must take hold of yourself, my dear. Everything's going to be perfectly all right. You mustn't lose your grip on yourself. If one of us is a nasty murderer, we know quite well it isn't you. Why, anyone would be crazy even to think of such a thing. You sit here and I'll stay right by you. You don't worry any." Her voice dried away as Perrault stood up. The wagon-lit conductor was hovering in the doorway. "You permit that I stay, monsieur?" "Certainly, Michael." Perrault cleared his throat. "Messieurs et mesdames, I will speak in English, since I think all of you know a little of that language. We are here to investigate the death of Samuel Edward Ratchet, alias Cassetti. There are two possible solutions of the crime. I shall put them both before you, and I shall ask Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine here to judge which solution is the right one. Now, you all know the facts of the case. Monsieur Ratchet was found stabbed this morning. He was last known to be alive at 12:37 last night, when he spoke to the wagon-lit conductor through the door. A watch in his pyjama pocket was found to be badly dented, and it had stopped at 1:15. Dr. Constantine, who examines the body when found, puts the time of death as having occurred between midnight and 2 in the morning. At half an hour after midnight, as you all know, the train ran into a snowdrift. After that time, it was impossible for anyone to leave the train. The evidence of Monsieur Hartman, who is a member of New York Detective Agency, several heads turned to look at Mr. Hartman, shows that no one could have passed his compartment, number 16, at the extreme end, without being seen by him. We are therefore forced to conclusion that the murderer is to be found among the occupants of one particular coach, the Stamboul Calais coach. That, I will say, was our theory. Comment? Ejaculated Monsieur Bouc, startled. But I will put before you an alternative theory. It is very simple. Monsieur Ratchet had a certain enemy whom he feared. He gave Monsieur Hartman a description of the enemy and told him that the attempt, if made at all, would most probably be made on the second night from Stamboul. Now, I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Monsieur Ratchet knew a good deal more than he told. The enemy, as Monsieur Ratchet expected, joined the train at Belgrade, or possibly at Vincochi. The door left open by Colonel Arbuthnot and Mr. McQueen, who had just descended to the platform. He was provided with a suit of wagon-knit uniform, which he wore over his ordinary clothes, and as a passkey which enabled him to gain access to Monsieur Ratchet's compartment in spite of the door being locked. Monsieur Ratchet was under the influence of sleeping draught. This man stabbed him with great ferocity and left the compartment through the communicating door leading to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment. That's so, said Mrs. Hubbard, nodding her head. He thrust the dagger he had used into Mrs. Hubbard's sponge bag in passing. Without knowing it, he lost the button of his uniform. Then he slipped out of the compartment, and along the corridor he hastily thrust the uniform into a suitcase in any empty compartment, and a few minutes later, dressed in ordinary clothes, he left the train just before it started off, again using the same means of egress, the door near the dining car. Everybody gasped. What about the watch? Demanded Mr. Hardman. Ah, there you have explanation of the whole thing. Monsieur Ratchet had omitted to put his watch back an hour as he should have done at Treasurbod. His watch still registered Eastern European time, which is 1 hour ahead of Central European time. It was 12:15 when Monsieur Ratchet was stabbed, not 1:15. But that's absurd, that explanation, cried Monsieur Bouc. What of the voice, then, who spoke from the compartment at 23 minutes to 1? It was either the voice of Ratchet or else his murderer. Not necessarily. It might have been, well, a third person. One who had gone in to speak to Ratchet and found him dead. He rang the bell to summon the conductor. Then, as you express it, the wind rose in him. He was afraid of being accused of the crime, and he spoke pretending to be Ratchet. C'est possible, admitted Bouc grudgingly. Perrault looked at Mrs. Hubbard. Yes, madame. You were going to say? Well, I don't know quite what I was going to say. Do you think I forgot to put my watch back too? No, mademoiselle. I think you heard the man pass through, but unconsciously later you had a nightmare of a man being in your compartment and woke up with a start and rang for the conductor. Well, I suppose that's possible, admitted Mrs. Hubbard. Princess Dragmaroff was looking at Perrault with a very direct glance. How do you explain the evidence of my maid, monsieur? Very simply, madame. Your maid recognized the handkerchief I showed her as yours. She somewhat clumsily tried to shield you. She did encounter a man, but earlier, while the train was at Vinkovy station. She pretended to have seen him at the later hour, which was a confused idea of giving you a watertight alibi. The princess bowed her head. You have thought of everything, monsieur. I admire you. There was silence. Then everyone jumped as Dr. Constantine suddenly hit the table a blow with his feet. But no, he said. No, and again. That was the explanation, not to hold water. It is a deficient in dozen minor points. The crime was not committed, so Monsieur Perrault must know that perfectly well. Perrault turned a curious glance on him. I see, he said. That I shall have to give my second solution, but do not abandon this one too abruptly. You may agree with it later. He turned back again to face the others. There is another possible solution to the crime. This is how I arrived at it. When I have heard all of the evidence, I leaned back and shut my eyes and began to think. Certain points presented themselves to me as words of attention. I enumerated these points to two of my colleagues. Some I have already allocated, such as the grease spot on the passport, etc. I will run over the points that remain. The first and most important is a remark made to me by Monsieur Bouc in the restaurant car at lunch on the first day after leaving Stamboul, to the effect that the company assembled was interesting because it was so varied, representing as it did all classes and nationalities. I agreed with him, but when this particular point came into my mind, I tried to imagine whether such an assembly were ever likely to be collected, under any conditions. And the answer I made to myself was only in America. In America, there might be a household composed of just such varied nationalities: an Italian chauffeur, an English governess, a Swedish nurse, a French lady's maid, and so on. That led me to the scheme of guessing. That is, casting each person for a certain part in the Armstrong drama. much as a producer casts a play. Well, that gave me an extremely interesting and satisfactory result. I had also examined in my own mind each separate person's evidence with some curious result. Take for the first evidence Monsieur McQueen. My first interview with him was entirely satisfactory, but in my second, he made a rather curious remark. I had described to him the finding of a note mentioning the Armstrong case. He said, "But surely," and then paused and went on. I mean, that was rather careless of the old man. Now, I could feel that he was not what he had started out to say, supposing what he had meant to say was, "But surely that was burnt," in which case McQueen knew of the note of the destruction. In other words, he was either the murderer or an accomplice of the murderer. Very good. Then the valet. He said his master was in the habit of taking a sleeping draught when traveling by train. That might be true, but would Rachet have taken one last night? The automatic under his pillow gave the lie to the statement. Rachet intended to be on the alert last night. Whatever narcotic was administered to him must have been done so without his knowledge. By whom? Obviously by Monsieur McQueen, or the valet. Now, we come to the evidence of Monsieur Hardman. I believed all that he told me about his own identity. But when it came to the actual methods he had employed to guard Monsieur Rachet, his story was neither more nor less than absurd. The only way effectively to have protected Rachet was to have passed the night actually in his compartment or in some spot where he could watch the door. The only thing that his evidence did show plainly was that no one in any other part of the train could possibly have murdered Rachet. I drew clear circle around Stambul Kali's carriage. That seemed to me a rather curious and inexplicable fact, and I put it aside to think it over. You probably have all heard now of a few words I have overheard between Miss Debenham and Colonel Abernath. The interesting thing to my mind was the fact that Colonel Abernath called her Mary, and was clearly on terms of intimacy with her. But Colonel was only supposed to have met her a few days previously, and I know Englishmen of the Colonel's type. Even if he had fallen in love with the young lady at first sight, he would have advanced slowly and with decorum, not rushing things. Therefore, I concluded that Colonel Abernath and Miss Debenham were in reality well acquainted, and were for some reason pretending to be strangers. Another small point was Miss Debenham's easy familiarity with the term long distance for telephone calls. Yet Miss Debenham had told me that she had never been in the States. To pass another witness, Mrs. Hubbard had told us that lying in bed, she was able to see whether the communicating door was bolted or not, and so asked Miss Olsen to see for her. Now, though her statement would have been perfectly true if she had been accompanying compartments numbers 2, 4, 12, or any even number, where the bolt is directly under the handle of the door. In uneven numbers, such as compartment number 3, the bolt is well above the handle, and could not, therefore, have been masked by the sponge bag in the least. I was forced to that conclusion that Miss Hubbard was inventing an incident that had never occurred. And there, let me say just a word or two about times. To my mind, the reality of interesting point about the dented watch was the place where it was found, in Rachet's pajama pocket. a singularly uncomfortable and unlikely place to keep one's watch, especially as there is a watch hook provided just by the edge of the bed. I felt sure, therefore, that the watch had been deliberately placed in the pocket and faked. The crime, then, was not committed at 1:15. Was it then committed earlier? To be exact, at 23 minutes to 1? My friend Monsieur Bouc advanced as an argument in favor of it, of the loud cry which awoke me from my sleep. But if Ratchet were heavily drugged, he could not have cried out. If he had been capable of crying out, he would have been capable of making some kind of struggle to defend himself, and there were no signs of any such struggle. I remember that McQueen had called attention not once but twice to the second time in a very blatant manner, to the fact that Ratchet could speak no French. I came to the conclusion that the whole business at 23 minutes to 1 was a comedy played for my benefit. Anyone might see through the watch business. It is a common enough device in detective stories. They assumed that I shall see through it and that, pluming myself on my own cleverness. I would go on to assume that since Ratchet spoke no French, the voice I heard 23 minutes to 1 could not be his, and that Ratchet must be already dead. But I am convinced that at 23 minutes to 1, Ratchet was still lying in his drugged sleep. But the device has succeeded. I have opened my door and looked out. I have actually heard the French phrase used. If I am so unbelievably dense as not to realize the significance of that phrase, it must be brought to my attention. If necessary, McQueen can come right out in the open. He can say, "Excuse me, Monsieur Perrault. That can't have been Monsieur Ratchet speaking. He cannot speak French." Now, when was the real time of the crime? And who has killed him? In my opinion, is the only opinion, Ratchet was killed at some time very close upon 2 o'clock. The latest hour the doctor gives as a possible. As to who has killed him, he paused, looking at his audience. He could not complain of any lack of attention. Every eye was fixed upon him. In the stillness, you could have heard a pin drop. He went on, slowly. He paused. He went on, slowly. I was particularly struck by the extraordinary difficulty of proving a case against any one person on the train, and on the other, rather curious coincidence that in each case, the testimony giving an alibi came from what I might describe as an unlikely person. Thus, Monsieur McQueen and Colonel Arbuthnot provided alibis for each other. Two persons between whom it seemed most unlikely there should be any prior acquaintanceship. The same thing happened with English valet and the Italian, with the Swedish lady and the English girl. I said to myself, this is extraordinary. They cannot all be in it. And then, messieurs, I saw light. They were all in it. For so many people connected with the Armstrong case to be traveling by the train by a coincidence was not only unlikely, it was impossible. It must be not a chance, but design. I remembered a remark of Colonel Arbuthnot's about trial by jury. A jury is composed of 12 people. There were 12 passengers. Ratchet was stabbed 12 times, and the thing that had worried me all along, the extraordinary crowd traveling in the Stamboul Calais coach at a slack time of year, was explained. Ratchet has escaped justice in America. There was no question to his guilt. I visualized a self-appointed jury of 12 people who condemned him to death and were forced by exigencies of the case to be their own executioners, and immediately, on the assumption that the whole case fell into beautiful shining order, I saw it as a perfect mosaic, each person playing his or her allotted part. It was so arranged that if suspicion should fall upon any one person, the evidence of one or more of the others would clear the accused person and confuse the issue. Ardman's evidence was necessary in the case some outsider should have suspected of the crime and be unable to prove an alibi. The passengers in Istanbul carriage were in no danger. Every minute detail of their evidence was worked out beforehand. The whole thing was a very cleverly planned jigsaw puzzle, so arranged that every piece of knowledge that came to light made the solution of the whole more difficult. As my friend Monsieur Bouc remarked, the case seemed fantastically impossible. That was exactly the impression intended to be conveyed. Did this solution explain everything? Yes, it did. The nature of the wounds, each inflicted by a different person. The artificial threatening letters, artificial since they were unreal, written only to be produced as evidence. Doubtless there were real letters, warning Ratchet of his fate, which McQueen destroyed, submitting for them these others. Then Ardman's story of being called in by Ratchet, a lie. Of course, from beginning to end, the description of the mythical small dark man with a womanish voice, a convenient description since it had the merit of non-incriminating any of the actual wagon-lit conductors and would apply equally well to man or a woman. The idea of stabbing is at first sight a curious one, but one reflection noting nothing would fit the circumstance so well. A dagger was the weapon that could be used by everyone, strong or weak, and it made no noise. I fancy, though I may be wrong, that each person in turn entered Ratchet's darkened compartment through that of Mrs. Hubbard and struck. They themselves would never know which blow actually killed him. The final letter this Ratchet had probably found on his pillow was carefully burnt, with no clue, pointing to the Armstrong case. There would be absolutely no reason for suspecting any of the passengers of the train. It would be put down as an outside job, and the small dark man with the womanish voice would actually have been seen by one or more of the passengers leaving the train at Broad. I do not know exactly what happened when the conspirators divorced. There was, I imagine, a hasty consultation, and then they decided to go through with it. It was true that one and all of the passengers were bound to come under suspicion, and that possibility had already been foreseen and provided for. The only additional thing to be done was to confuse the issue even further. Two so-called clues were dropped in by the dead man's compartment, one incriminating Colonel Abenot, who had the strongest alibi, and whose connection with the Armstrong family was probably the hardest to prove. But the second clue, the handkerchief incriminating Princess Dragmarov, who by virtue of her social position, her particularly frail physique, and the alibi given her by her maid and the conductor, was practically an unassailable position. Further to confuse the issue, a red herring, was drawn across the trail of the mythical woman in a red kimono. Again, I am to bear witness to this woman's existence. There is a heavy bang at my door. I get up and look out and see the scarlet kimono disappearing in the distance. A judicious selection of people, the conductor, Miss Debnam, and McQueen, would also have seen her. It was, I think, someone with a sense of humor who thoughtfully placed the scarlet kimono on top of my suitcase whilst I was interviewing people in the dining car. Where the garment came from in the first place, I do not know. I suspect it is the property of Countess Andrini, since her luggage contained only a chiffon negligee, so elaborate as to be more a tea gown than a dressing gown. When McQueen first learned the letter, which had been so carefully burnt, had in part escaped destruction, and that the word Armstrong was exactly the word remaining, he must at once have communicated his news to the others. It was in this minute that the position of Countess Andrini became acute, and her husband immediately took steps to alter the passport. It was their second piece of bad luck. A little tea break. They one and all agreed to deny utterly any connection with the Armstrong family. They knew I had no immediate means of finding out the truth, and they did not believe that I should go into the matter unless my suspicions were aroused against one particular person. Now, there was no further point to consider, allowing that my theory of crime was the correct one, and I believe that it must be the correct one. Then obviously the wagon-lit conductor himself must be privy to the plot. But if that gave us 13 persons, not 12, instead of the usual formula of so many people, one is guilty, I faced with the problem that of 13 persons, one and only one was innocent. Which was that person? I came to a very odd conclusion. I came to the conclusion that the person who had taken no part in the crime was the person who would be considered the most likely to do it. I refer to Countess Andrini. I was impressed by the earnestness of her husband when he swore to me solemnly, on his honor, that his wife never left her compartment that night. I decided that Count Andrini took, so to speak, his wife's place. If so, then Pierre Michel was definitely one of the 12, but how could one explain his complicity? He was a decent man who had been many years in the employ of the company, not the kind of man who could be bribed to assist in a crime. Then Pierre Michel must be involved in the Armstrong case, but that seemed very improbable. Then I remembered that the dead nursery maid was French. Supposing that the unfortunate girl had been Pierre Michel's daughter, that would explain everything. It would also explain the place chosen for the staging of the crime. Were there any others whose part in the drama was not clear? Colonel Abernorth, I put down as a friend of the Armstrongs. They had probably been through the war together. The maid, Hildegard Schmidt, I could guess her place in the Armstrong household. I am perhaps over-greedy, but I sense a good cook instinctively. I laid a trap for her. She fell into it. I said I know she was a good cook. She answered, yes, indeed, all my ladies have said so, but if you are employed as a lady's maid, your employer seldom have a chance of learning whether or not you are a good cook. Then there it was Hardman. He seemed quite definitely not to belong to the Armstrong household. I could only imagine that he had been in love with the French girl. I spoke to him on the charm of foreign women, and again I obtained the reaction that I was looking for. Sudden tears came into his eyes, which he pretended were dazzled by the snow. There remains Mrs. Hubbard. Now, Mrs. Hubbard, let me say, played the most important part of the drama, by occupying the compartment communicating with that of Ratchet. She was more open to suspicion than anyone else in the nature of things. She could not have an alibi to fall back upon. To play the part, she perfectly naturally, slightly ridiculous, American, fond mother, an artist was needed. But there was an artist connected with the Armstrong family. Mrs. Armstrong's mother, Linda Alden, the actress. He stopped. Then in a soft, rich, dreamy voice, quite unlike the one he had used all the journey, Mrs. Hubbard said, she had used, I always fancied myself in comedy parts, she went on, still dreamily. That slip about the sponge bag was silly. It shows you should always rehearse properly. We tried it on the other way out, but I was in an even number compartment then. I suppose I never thought of bolts being in different places. She shifted her position a little and looked straight at Perrault. You know all about it, Monsieur Perrault. You're a very wonderful man. But even you can't quite imagine what it was like, that awful day in New York. I was just crazy with grief. So were the servants, and Colonel Arbuthnot was there too. He was John Armstrong's best friend. He saved my life in the war, said Arbuthnot. We decided then and there, perhaps we were mad, I don't know, that the sentence of death that Cassetti had escaped had got to be carried out. There were 12 of us, or rather 11. Suzanne's father was over in France, of course. First we thought we'd draw lots as to who should do it. But in the end we decided out this way. It was the chauffeur Antonio, who suggested it. Mary worked out all the details later with Hector McQueen. He'd always adored Sonia, my daughter. And it was he who explained to us exactly how Cassetti's money had managed to get him off. It took a long time to perfect our plan. We had first to track Ratchet down, and Hardman managed that in the end. Then we had to try to get Masterman Hector into his employment, or at any rate, one of them. Well, we managed that. Then we had the consultation with Suzanne's father. Colonel Arbuthnot was very keen on having 12 of us. He seemed to think that it made more in order. He didn't like the stabbing idea much, but he agreed that it did solve most of our difficulties. Well, Suzanne's father was willing. Suzanne was his only child. We knew from Hector that Ratchet would be coming back from the east, sooner or later by the Orient Express. With Pierre Michel actually working on that train, the chance was too good to be missed. Besides, it would be a good way of not incriminating any outsiders. My daughter's husband had to know, of course, and he insisted on coming on the train with her. Hector wrangled it so that Ratchet selected the right day for traveling when Michael would be on duty. We meant to engage every carriage in Istanbul Calais coach, but unfortunately there was one carriage we couldn't get. It was reserved long before the director of the company. Mr. Harris, of course, was a myth, but it would have been awkward to have any stranger in Hector's compartment. And then, at the last minute, you came. She stopped. Well, she said, you know everything now, Monsieur Perrault. What are you going to do about it? If it must all come out, can't you lay the blame upon me and me only? I would have stabbed that man 12 times willingly. it wasn't only that he was responsible for my daughter's death and her child's and that of the other child who might have been alive and happy now. It was more than that. There had been other children before Daisy. There might be others in the future. Society had condemned him. We were the only carrying out the sentence, but it's unnecessary to bring all these others into it. All these good, faithful souls, and poor Michael and Mary and Colonel Arbuthnot, they love each other. Her voice was wonderful, echoing through the crowded space, that deep, emotional, heart-stirring voice that had thrilled many a New York audience. Perrault looked at his friend. "You are the director of the company, Monsieur Bouc," he said. "What do you say?" Monsieur Bouc cleared his throat. "In my opinion, Monsieur Perrault," he said, "the first theory you put forward was the correct one, decidedly so. I suggest that is the solution we offer to the Yugoslavian police when they arrive. You agree, Doctor?" "Certainly I agree," said Dr. Constantine. "As regards the medical evidence, I think that I made on the two fantastic suggestions." "Then," said Perrault, "having placed my solution before you, I have honor to retire from the case." Oh, boy, that was it. I thought it went on. That was it, ladies and gentlemen. That was the end of... There's other stories in there, but that was Murder on the Orient Express. And so they all lived, well, they all lived excepting for one. Anyway, darlings, thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for being here at Story Time. My books, things should be arriving this week. I have some very special stories to read you. I hope you are enjoying them. If you are enjoying my channel, make certain to hit the like, the subscribe, the share button. Thank you for all of the communication. And I know there will eventually be a link down below, but if you are enjoying me, YouTube doesn't really pay. So anything you would like to donate, you can donate through my Patreon at The Gentleman Psychic, and you can donate through PayPal under rlillard6@gmail.com. You can do Venmo and Cash App under Richard-Lael Lillard. So those are things that you can do there. You don't have to give. Thank you to those who do. Thank you to my top tier patrons. Mary Jane King, Dee Lissaro, Lauren Morgan Richards. I have other ones who have been ever so faithful. Cafe Noir, Zaisha, I want to thank you as well. And thank you, even if you cannot give. I still love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me for story time. Like, comment, subscribe, share, because that helps me out with the algorithms too. And until next time, my darlings, have a good night. Thank you for joining story time. Love to you. When will you start on Fridays? Well, Malika, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be emceeing at the Beetle House, mostly on the weekends, so I might have to push back to Tuesdays. I do apologize. Anyway, maybe Wednesdays, I don't know. Send me a message. Tell me what days you would like to. Leave it in the comments below. What days would you prefer to have story time? I would like to do it more frequently. I would like to do it a couple of days a week so that we can have more time together. Anyway, darlings, I so appreciate you. Thank you for putting up with me for this hour. I love you all. Good night.